We'll wait for people to start coming on. See there we go. We can't see is the bottom there. Okay. We have 27. Okay, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the New York Oracle Users Group webinar today. And today we have Michael Ferrante, and we'll speak about him for a moment. Meanwhile, let me talk about the New York Oracle Users Group. And we were formed almost 40 years ago for the exchange of ideas, assistance, and support among users of Oracle software products. And we're always looking for abstracts. Please contact us at nyoug.org, at NYOUG, call abstracts. You can reach us on Twitter, Meetup, and of course, I mentioned abstracts, LinkedIn, Facebook, and our website, nyoug.org. You'll have to ignore the cloud word. We were offering a 2023 discount. We'll probably be doing the same thing next year. And finally, I want to thank Viscosity North America. A little bit blurb about Viscosity North America. Viscosity North America is a full Oracle stack consulting firm with a core expertise in the Oracle database, including RAC, Oracle Apex, near zero downtime migrations, performance tuning, and high availability, and with decades of experience with infrastructure, including engineered systems. And again, I want to thank Viscosity and a little bit about Michael Ferrante. Michael Ferrante is a senior principal product manager on Oracle's application development tools team, working primarily with Oracle Forms. Joining Oracle in 1999, Michael has spent over 2 decades in various roles associated with Oracle Forms and related Fusion middleware technologies. From support engineer to global technical lead to product manager and numerous roles in between, Michael's remained closely connected to Oracle's middleware products, but none closer than Oracle Forms. Working side by side with Oracle's customers and Oracle's development and many Oracle support teams, Michael helps to bring the latest innovations to future versions of Oracle Forms and other application development technologies. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this important topic of Oracle Forms. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat at the bottom, and Michael will attend to them when they arise. Thank you, Michael. Please share your screen, and we'll begin the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Coleman. I want to start by thanking you and the New York User Group, as well as Viscosity. This is a first for me, so if anyone from the New York Oracle User Group, this is probably the first time you're hearing from me, but for the others that are out there that know my name, face, and my flow, you'll be familiar with a lot of what we'll be talking about in just a few minutes. But again, thank you to the New York User Group as well as Viscosity for setting this all up. This should be a pretty good opportunity for us to get up to date and get a view into what's coming next. So let me go ahead and start sharing, and let's see how this flows.
And again, one more time, if you have any questions, please just put them into the chat and make sure it's directed to everyone. Thank you, Michael.
Awesome. So I'm going to get my chat set up on my side. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. As the title suggested, we're going to talk a little bit about 12.2.119, which is our latest release in the Forms and Reports Fusion middleware family. Let's see what we've got here. Because I am going to end the session with a little bit of information about what's coming next, specifically 14. the next major release of Fusion middleware, I am required to share this safe harbor statement with you, which basically says that anything I do discuss here is really just a planning set of information. It may or may not get delivered, so please don't expect to force any contract to be written suggesting that Mike said there's going to be a particular feature, because it may or may not be. We won't know until such time that we actually deliver, but please take just a second or so to skim through that and understand what we're reading there. Quick agenda. I'm going to talk about the entire Forms 12 family because I think it is important. It's actually been a lot different release than what we've done in the past. I'm going to quickly talk about support specifically to version 12. We'll talk about what's new in 12.2.1.19, at least some of the highlighted features. Talk about what's involved in upgrading to get to 12.2.1.19 if you choose to do an upgrade rather than a clean install. And then we'll talk about what's next. There's that version 14 hint. And then a little bit of a schedule for the rest of the year to give you an idea of what I've got planned from public-facing sessions. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a few questions beyond what's in chat. So let's quickly take a look at the version 12 family. As Coleman mentioned, if you have questions along the way, I honestly don't mind that you interrupt and do that, whether it's in chat, and I believe you could even ask to speak. Chat's probably going to be a little bit easier. However, the only thing I do ask is that you keep it in context with what we're talking about. Try not to get ahead of me, because the odds are I'll probably answer your question as we go. So in the version 12 family, if anyone remembers or not, it was back in 2015 that we first delivered version 12. Version 12 came with just an endless array of new features, enhancements, bug fixes, and just so much more, including WebLogic Server version 12, at least compared to version 11. Again, I'm not going to go through these in great detail. I just wanted to illustrate how much was actually done and the cadence that we delivered each of these versions. If you look real closely, you'll notice that approximately every year we released a new feature-bearing release. And again, each version had at least some new features in it. And of course, bug fixes, security updates, and those kind of things. The yellow entries on this slide represent versions that are no longer entitled to error correction support. That means if you need a bug fix on any one of those old versions, unfortunately, there's technically no way we could deliver those fixes to you unless those bug fixes already exist. 12.2.1.4 and 12.2.1.19 are the only versions that realistically are entitled to error correction at this point. However, error correction for 12.2.1.4 for all platforms will end approximately this time next year. So if you're not already on 12.2.1.19, it's probably a good time to start thinking about doing that. I would certainly recommend you not wait until August of 2024 to start thinking about upgrading. Give yourself a little time. That way, if you have problems, the support team will be able to help you in a situation where you're not under duress to have something done quickly. Give yourself some leeway, and hopefully things will transition well. We're going to talk about upgrade here shortly. So that's kind of the version 12 family. We don't really anticipate any further releases in the version 12 family, at least not for forms and reports. The last version, 12.2.1.19, was actually an unplanned version. It was a version released as a result of a requirement to have database 19, the embedded client, included in the stack. So had that not fallen into the timeline that it did, we probably would not have done 12.2.1.19. So in the 12 family, we released all kinds of new features. We're not going to have the time here to discuss what they all are, but some of the highlighted features. We introduced what we called Forms Application Deployment Services, which gives you a really cool way to administer applications. You basically can package up your application modules and configuration files and all the things that make up your Forms application into a single file. We call it a FAR file, Forms Archive, but realistically, it's just a jar file. And then you'll deploy it through this web interface that I have presented here, which makes life a little bit easier. On the right-hand side, you could see a couple of the changes we made for Fusion middleware control specific to forms. We introduced a concept of an advanced configuration page, which actually is nothing more than a full text editor, which was a common request. Having that full text editor gives you the ability to basically copy old files and their content and its contents directly in and replace, whatever the default entries are as a whole, because generally you're not able to go right into the file system and make those changes as you might have done 10 or 15 or 20 years ago in the older versions. So this gives you a little bit of a way around that problem. However, in this early release and in the early version 12 versions, you were limited to a specific set of files. You could not customize all of the configuration files. However, going forward, we're going to extend that and introduce more of our more commonly used configuration files. We also took a look at how single sign-on worked and looked at some of the feedback we got from customers, which basically suggested we don't like using or being forced to use Oracle Internet Directory as our LDAP server. So on the form side, we said, how else can we do this? Where can we store the resource access descriptors that are needed to support single sign-on? And we actually came up with not only a good way to do it, but arguably the right way to do it. And now we use Oracle Platform Security Services, which disconnects us from the LDAP server. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you're using Oracle Access Manager, you basically can use any LDAP server that Oracle Access Manager supports, because from forms, we have no idea what LDAP server you're using, and quite frankly, we don't really care because we don't talk to it. So it doesn't really matter what Oracle Access Manager does behind its scenes. So that was a really good move forward, because the idea of forcing you to have to use it was kind of an unfortunate architecture. The administration of those remote access descriptors is now done in Fusion Middle. Well, it's always been done in Fusion Middleware Control, but with a much better interface than it's ever had before. You can see a picture of that on the right. However, for those of you that have followed me over the years, one of the key features that we've been challenged with over the years was to how to improve the runtime user interface. And in version 12, although relatively minor, we did make a handful of changes in version 12 to give you ways in which you could help make the user interface not look like it came from Windows NT 4 days. Again, this is just a small snippet of what you actually can do, and in some cases, maybe not even the prettiest of examples, but some examples nonetheless. Going forward, we're going to do this a little bit more, only we're going to do it bigger, better, and better. So we've got some really cool stuff coming in 14, and again, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But lots of cool UI features in version 12 of Forms. And I encourage everybody to take just a little bit of time and look at your applications and consider what you could potentially do to make your applications look and feel just a little bit better. I know Frank is actually on the call, and he did an excellent job. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that Frank Hoffman is typically out there kind of sharing some of these ideas with things that he tends to do with his customers. And I definitely appreciate the visibility from his point of view. So you might want to take a look at Twitter and check out some of the examples that have been floating around on social media. Reports. I know that there's a whole group of you sitting back saying, great, Mike, but what about reports? Well, reports is distributed with the Forms software. It's kind of a package deal. It's been that way for a long, long time, and we have no plans on changing that anytime soon. That said, reports and forms are two completely separate products or technologies, even though they're packaged together. Reports was deemed a deprecated product as we went into the version 12 family, or in maintenance mode, as we like to call it. And what that actually means is kind of what the term suggests, maintenance mode. We will maintain it. We do plan on delivering new releases. They will include bug fixes and security fixes as needed. The key is that in a deprecated state, there are no plans to include new features or enhancements unless they're actually required to make the technology compatible in the stack that it's running. So if you're expecting new features in reports, they're not likely to be coming anytime soon, if at all. The key is that there are no current plans to de-support reports. In other words, it will stay in maintenance mode, continue to be delivered, and continue to get bug fixes along the way as we go forward. However, just because we are doing that, I don't necessarily suggest that that's a good excuse to not consider what the replacement is or the migration path. In order to make your migration path a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more cost effective, we have included entitlements to Analytics Publisher or BI Publisher within your current licensing. So if you didn't already know it, you already are entitled to use Analytics Publisher or BI Publisher in the context of migrating from Oracle reports. You'll need to talk to your Oracle accounts team or sales rep for more details on that. Let's be clear on some of the terms that I use. Again, deprecated simply means that the product goes into a maintenance mode. It is planned to continue to be delivered, but again, only with bug fixes and security fixes. New features may be introduced, but only at our discretion based on the needs of the product, not necessarily the needs of the customer. Desupported means it's desupported, it's gone. We will likely stop shipping it in that state. And that will basically be the end of it. There will be no new bug fixes, no new anything. It basically will be pulled from the stack. And again, at this time, there are no plans to desupport it. So we're in pretty good shape with reports. Okay. Before I go any further, anybody have any questions about that? Chat seems pretty quiet. Okay. So let's take a look at what support means for this 12 family. So if you haven't looked at the Oracle Lifetime Support Policy Guide lately, I recommend you do so because the dates were changed recently, at least a few months ago. And the new dates for version 12 of the entire Fusion middleware family take us out with Premier support through the end of December 2026, or another way of saying that is the beginning of 2027. And extended support will take you out until the end of 2027 or the beginning of 2028, depending upon how you'd like to look at that. I purposely reduced this little screenshot down because there's so much other noise, visual noise on the page. It tends to get confusing, but this is the key information. The December 2026 and the December 2027 date, as well as the Oracle support note number listed immediately below it. That support note explains the grace period. And what that grace period explains is that there's a 12-month overlap period where two versions are available. And that's where the September 2024 end of error correction for 12.2.1.4 comes from. It basically says that this lifetime support policy assumes you are running the latest available version. You have 1 year or 12 months to get onto that latest version if you expect to get support. And that, again, is explained in that support note. It tends to be an oversight occasionally. I'm also often asked about new versions. People want to say things like, oh, Forms is in its terminal release because there's no other versions listed in the lifetime support policy. Unfortunately, that's not a true statement. The lifetime support policy represents only versions that are available to the public. We are not going to put future going versions in this table, partially because we tend to change the names of them very quickly, and the dates change, and there's a lot of information that changes, so we can't possibly put future going versions in here. If you don't believe that, please go look at the database releases and you'll see exactly the same thing. You're not going to find a version that comes out 10 years from now listed in that table. These are just versions that are available to the public. As new versions are released, we do update this table and give you the latest information as it is available. Okay. So Coleman's telling me that there's in the Q&A box, which I was not monitoring, so bear with me just a second. I'm not going to go through all of these because some of these are getting a little bit ahead of me, which is what I was hoping we would not do. But there is a question on here. It says, could you make a little bit clearer, go deeper into the licensing between Forms and Analytics Server? So if you look at your Forms runtime license, which is probably called Forms and Reports, or Internet Application Server Enterprise Edition, or WebLogic Server Suite, you'll see that there's a restricted use entry in the license text that says very specifically that you are entitled to run Analytics Publisher applications. If you look in your Internet Developer Suite license, which is what your developers should all have, you will see something similar. However, the restricted use case there is that it's going to say your application developers have entitlements to develop Analytics Publisher applications. So again, that licensing entitlement has been available since about April of 2017. It's been there for a long time. It is not an entitlement to run Analytics Server. It is an entitlement to run Analytics Publisher, which is a subset of Analytics Server. So be careful there. You're not entitled to use the analytics functionality of that product suite, just the reporting part of it. Okay. The other questions I will get to shortly. Like I said, most of them I will answer as we go through the slides. I did mention about 12214 having error correction support end in 2004. And again, the grace period information I did mention, and I'm repeating it because it is really important. And again, as I said before, if you have not upgraded yet, I really encourage you to do so, because waiting until the last minute is always a bad idea. It puts everybody under pressure, including your team as well as the Oracle support team, and you could avoid that if you start early. Okay. So let's take a quick look at 12.2.1.19. As I hinted to in the very beginning, 12.2.1.19 was an let's just say an unplanned release. It was released primarily because we had a requirement to become compatible with the 12.2.1, with the 19 database, the embedded client. If you're not familiar with it, we've done that with many of the other components in the middleware stack, for example, OHS. However, they were able to do it a little bit differently. They were able to patch OHS and make it a database 19 compatible component. We, unfortunately, for technical reasons, were not able to do that. So we were not the only ones with the requirement. It was all across Fusion middleware. So if you're interested in all the new features beginning to end, I will recommend that you take a look on the Forms product page. There is a new features document that's been updated over the years to be a completely cumulative list of all the new features. It is approximately a 40-page document of new features. And bear in mind that even after 40 pages, it still does not include all the updates that we made. Version 12 was an incredibly successful release. I think we made some really good improvements in it. And if you haven't considered updating or upgrading, or however you want to term it, your applications, you really should consider doing it, because many of the new features are trivial to implement, but come with a fairly decent bang for the buck. So be sure to take a look at that new features guide. Okay. For 12.2.1.19, and Coleman, I think you asked about this, what is available for cloud? Cool thing is we've updated our cloud footprint. We now have a marketplace image in cloud based on 12.2.1.19. It is Linux only at the moment, Oracle Linux. We're looking at the possibility of doing Windows, but that is still something being considered. This one that I have up on the screen right now is an image of the bring your own license option. And kind of as the name suggests, it is intended for those customers who already have licensing and potentially want to transition from on-prem to cloud, and you'll just transition your existing license you'll stop using it on-prem and you'll transition to using it on cloud. So that's a good approach for doing that. Most people don't realize, but technically you could use a developer suite license here for the purpose of doing development. Of course, your development license or Internet Developer Suite licenses are not intended to be used by multiple users. They are single user licenses, but you can use that license in this space if you wanted to. But again, we are limited to Linux at the moment. The other thing we introduced very specifically to 12.2.1.19 is a UCM offering, or universal credit model, which essentially is a pay-as-you-go option, which means if the server is running, you're paying for the time. If the server is not running, you're not paying for the time. And let me correct that. I shouldn't say server. If the instance is not running, in other words, you turn the machine off, you're not paying for the time. The dollar amount on the right-hand side is in US dollars, but as you can see, for those of you that are in the US and understand US dollars, we are only charging approximately 46 cents per hour per OCPU. So in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty inexpensive. This does not include the actual subscription cost to cloud and whatever features you would like to have there. For example, how much object storage, how many CPUs do you want to use, all of that information. So this is over and above that, but still in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty inexpensive. That price, in addition to your CPU time, also includes support. So your support costs potentially go down if you use this option as well. I will tell you that this is a great option for anyone who does not have a 24/7 by 365 operation. But if you are running all around the clock, all day, every day, I think in the end, you're going to find the cost of this is not much different than doing bring your own license. But this is definitely a cost-effective way for customers that don't have to run around the clock all year long. So that might be worth considering. Both of these are available right now as we speak. If you're not familiar with them, I'll give you the quick rundown, and the quick rundown is this. If you're familiar with how your mobile phone works and how you get apps on your mobile phone, whether it's the Google Play Store on an Android device or the Apple App Store on an Apple device, it really is almost as simple as, you go to the Oracle Marketplace, you find this particular image, and I didn't show it here, but just below the white box that you see in that image, there's a little Get App button. You'll click on the Get App, and it's going to start the process of deploying or creating a new compute instance for you. It is going to ask you a few questions, things like, what do you want the machine name to be? How much disk space do you want? And some basic questions that hopefully are relatively obvious as to why they're asking them. Once you get those questions answered, it'll take just a minute or so, and it'll create a new machine for you. And then when you log in the first time, it's going to ask you some Fusion middleware questions so it could set up the instance the way you want. For example, what do you want the WebLogic server admin password to be, and those kind of questions. Once you answer those questions, on the smallest shape we have, meaning one CPU, the instance will be ready to go in 15 minutes or less. That means all the software installed, configured, and all the servers running in less than 15 minutes. So all you have to do is put your application on that machine, get the database set up with whatever database objects you need to run your application, generate and go. Realistically, I've probably spent more time talking than it would take to set that up and get a basic configuration going with your application on it. So this is a great way to get your application in cloud, whether you do it for testing, development, or production, that is entirely your choice. It is completely a customer managed environment, meaning we set up that initial stuff for you. Everything after that is on you. Patching, uptime, downtime, whatever it is, whatever the configuration is, it's all on you after that. If you decide you want to delete all the software and put something else on it, you could do that as well. It's your machine, do whatever you want with it. This is just a getting started mechanism so that you could get your application into cloud as quickly as possible. Like I said, with a one CPU machine, you could have this running in 15 minutes. We've experimented with some bigger shapes. We've tried 24 CPU machines, just as an example. That takes approximately 6 minutes to provision. So think about it. In 6 minutes, you could have WebLogic server, Forms, Oracle HTTP server, and if you choose the option, there's an option to do a local database on that instance. All of it installed, configured, and running in 6 minutes. You can't even download the software that fast. So this is a pretty great way to get into cloud. Okay. So there are a few questions in the Q&A. I'm going to get back to those in just a second. So we were talking about 12.2.1.19 and what we introduced. We introduced a handful of diagnostic improvements. Quite honestly, many of those diagnostic improvements really were for the benefit of our support organization, because we were finding that collecting some of the information from customers on certain aspects of the technology was a bit awkward. So we felt that because most of these were relatively easy to introduce, we would go ahead and do that and make them available to the customers as well. I won't go into too much detail here, but again, we improved some of the diagnostic functionality and the handling of the diagnostics. For example, you can see in the code editor on the right, we've given you a way to copy the text out of that code editor. In the grand scheme of things, that seems incredibly trivial, but it is pretty important when you're trying to explain to support that you're having a problem. and then you're trying to manually transcribe what the text says, at least this way, you could see I've got a little notepad session there. You could just copy the text, put it in Notepad, drop it in your service request, and share that with support. And now they'll know word for word exactly what you're seeing and be able to have a better understanding of what's going on. Similar, it's true of WebUtil and specifically the client host command. Again, that was another one that was very difficult to troubleshoot often. We do offer a flag now that helps to output some more useful information so that you could help, or support team could help understand what in the world is going on and get you going a little bit faster. Okay. I think some people have already used some of this stuff. In fact, I think this was one of the questions. So in 12.2.1.4, well, in 12.2.1 in general, we introduced the standalone launcher, and it was our first go at having a utility like that. And along the way, we've taken feedback from our customers as well as internally as well in an effort to try to make it a little bit more user friendly and a little bit more functional. In this latest release in 12.2.1.19, we introduced support for custom protocol handlers. For people that don't know what custom protocol handlers are, if you happen to use Zoom or Slack or probably just about any other natively installed piece of software that somehow is doing things like communication, you'll notice that you could launch right out of an email or a web browser. Custom protocol handlers are what allows you to do that. It basically looks at we'll call it the prefix or the protocol of the URL that you've provided. And if the browser doesn't know what to do with it, it then looks on the operating system to see if somewhere on the operating system that protocol is registered. And if it is, what do I do with it? And that's what happens here. Once the user's machine is set up to be aware of one of these two custom protocols, you could then configure it to launch the standalone launcher, which means that you could actually have a web page launch the standalone launcher. You don't need to launch from a DOS shell. You don't need to launch from a desktop shortcut. You could click right on a hyperlink in a web page and kick off a Forms application or JavaScript or any other way that you want in a web page. We've added support for language detection. Language detection has been in Forms since we went web 15, 18, almost 20 years ago. However, the standalone launcher did not support that. What language detection means is if you have a form, for example, that has text written in English, and you also have one written in French, when the user makes the request for the application, the user's language is sent down to the server. Based on that information, you could have the server send the appropriate language version of the module back to the user so that your French users could see the French application or French version of the application, and your English users could see English and so on and so forth through all the other languages. Previously, that was not available in Standalone Launcher. It is now. The other thing you were always able to do with web launching was the ability to specify which Java version you wanted. This was kind of important because if, for example, you had Java code written into your application on the client side, you may have been dependent on a particular Java version. And with the inability to specify which Java version you're running, you may end up having a problem. So let's say, for example, you have, excuse me, you have a Java bean written in Java 11, but the user tries to run standalone launcher with Java 8. There's the possibility that Java bean is going to fail because the Java versions aren't compatible with each other. This will give you the ability to specify as an administrator exactly which version you want or which family you want or which version and newer do you want. And the other thing we introduced into the standalone launcher is the SSL TLS certificate importer. This was a huge problem in the early versions of the standalone launcher because the only way to use standalone launcher with SSL was to have typically an administrator manually import the SSL certificates into the user's key store. A little bit of a clumsy exercise. With this interface, you're able to do it literally with a click of a button, which is exactly the same thing that the Java plugin did, which is somewhat similar to how a browser works. When displayed, the user is given, I don't know if you could see it there, but there's a more information button or link, whatever you want to call it, where the user can review what that certificate looks like. I mean, even if they don't understand exactly what they're looking at, they can see some of the information. Where did the certificate come from? When is it valid through? And so on and so forth, and make a conscious decision as to whether or not they would like to continue or not. There's also a flag to auto import the certificate, which I don't recommend necessarily using except for testing, but it could be the case that you have a lot of faith in your environment and you trust it. You trust that no one is going to do anything malicious. You could bypass the displaying of this dialogue and just automatically import certificates. Again, I don't recommend that, but for design time, it is certainly helpful. Okay. I'm sorry, lots of questions in my scroll didn't scroll in my question and answer box.
Shall we read them off or transfer them to chat? How'd you like to do that, Mike?
We might as well keep going, and then I'll come back to some of these because some of these are a little bit off topic.
Okay.
So we also added a translation utility. Many of our customers in Europe have asked about this because years past we offered a tool called Translation Hub or Translation Builder. We had both. We changed the name somewhere along the line, and for various reasons we had to desupport that product. And throughout version 11 and into 12, we didn't have a translation tool. And remember I said earlier, hey, it would be really nice if we had a version of our form with French text in it and one with German text and so on and so forth. That's what these tools were for, to help you create those different language versions. This utility, again, kind of in a version 1, is the first iteration of this utility to get us back into providing translation tooling. It is a command line driven tool, so it's not as pretty as what we had before, but it's definitely functional. And I guess the advantage of it being command line driven is you can kind of batch drive things. You could actually in a script file run through all your modules at once and make similar changes if code is similar in certain places. So that's an option. But anyway, it does work on an industry standard concept or format called XLIFT, as you see on here. So you could use any editor that supports XLIFT version 1 or newer. And that could even be a text editor. I don't recommend using a text editor, but you could use one. There's a handful of free ones on the market. There also are some that you have to purchase licenses for, but nonetheless, there are definitely plenty of tools out there that you could use to do XLIFT conversions. And bear in mind, in this case, Forms is not the only one using XLIFT. As far as I know, Apex leverages XLIFT functionality, Visual Builder, and some of the other technologies leverage XLIFT. So that's kind of the neat thing about this, is that it's an industry standard translation format. So it for people that are familiar with using it in one area, doing it here should be similar as well. Okay, so let's press on here. So some miscellaneous changes, and again, some of these are trivial, some are a little bit larger. We added client DPI ratio. What that's going to allow you to do is have the application on the user tier automatically adjust to the screen size. This is not the same as responsive design. This is more of think of it as zooming almost. So for people that have, for example, high resolution 4K monitors and the application looks really teeny because the monitor has such high resolution that you can't see it, leveraging this parameter can help overcome that. You know, it'll increase the size of the application so that it's visible to the user. It does work on percentages of the display size. So for example, if you set it to 100%, what that means is that when the application runs, it's going to try to magnify the application to 100% of the size of the display. If you set it to 50%, it'll leverage 50% of the display, and so on and so forth. It does not change any functionality in the form. Again, all it is doing is changing the visualization of the form to the user. We added support for changing toolbar canvas colors, which again, it's a trivial change. It actually was more of a bug fix than anything else, but I did want to mention it here for anyone that's interested in doing that. The bigger of the changes was that in 12.2.1.19, we updated the JDK to a little bit newer version. I mentioned that we updated the database embedded client to 19.14, and we updated the OPatch version. There are some other lower level changes that we made, but I won't bore anybody with them. here. There were a bunch of bug fixes. We actually consumed the 12.2.1.4 January quarterly patch, so that was approximately 20 or 25 bug fixes. We also included 10 other bug fixes that were not available in 12.2.1.4 at the time. So a handful of bug fixes as well as the features as well. Okay. So let's take a quick shot at upgrading. The starting version requirement for upgrading is 12.2.1.3 or 12.2.1.4. If you don't start on one of those two versions, your only option is to do a new install. In other words, all of your configuration in the domain and everything that goes away. You can't upgrade from an older version. So if you want to upgrade directly to 12.2.1.19, you have to first upgrade to one of these two versions. Once you do that, getting to 12.2.1.19 honestly is simple. As I said, similar before with the cloud instance, upgrading to 12.2.1.19 from 12.2.1.3 or 12.2.1.4 is trivial, and I've probably spent far more time talking about it than it will actually take to do it. There is a concept of in-place upgrade. This is what we recommend doing. It is the safest, the simplest, and the most reliable way of doing it because there's nearly no way that you could make a mistake. So that's definitely the approach to take. There are some cases where an out-of-place upgrade is necessary. For example, if it's the case that your Oracle home or any part of the path has something in it you want changed, you want to locate the Oracle home somewhere other than where it was previously, you could leverage this out-of-place upgrade and relocate the Oracle home. There is a downside to using that. One, you have to use these two utilities that I have mentioned here. It is time consuming, and there are some things that are not upgraded or updated for you. For example, if you're running on Windows, the Windows registry is not updated. So you'll want to make sure that you carefully consider, is it really worth changing, for example, the path that the Oracle home is in versus the simple upgrade process. Me personally, I wouldn't worry about who cares what the path is, doesn't really matter. Okay. So,
Michael, let me just break in for a moment. I'm sorry for interrupting.
no, you're
So
good.
to the audience, I understand chat is not working, so please do as you were doing with Q&A, and we'll be monitoring that as well.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead
Thank
and
you.
stop right. I'm going to go ahead and stop right here anyway, and I'm going to go through some of these questions. And then if you guys want to respond to any as we can, because from here we're gonna move on to 14. We've got about 15 minutes left or so. So the first question that came in the beginning was, how can I launch forms from a web browser instead of a jar file? So there's two ways to do that. You could leverage Java Web Start, which, similar to what I mentioned earlier with custom protocol handlers, you could launch a Java Web Start application from a web browser off of a hyperlink or JavaScript code or whichever you like. It's still going to bring a jar file down to the client. Forms is creating a Java client, not an HTML client. And let's make that clear. Forms is not generating web pages. It never has, and it probably never will. It is not a web page design tool. That's not its intent. So if you want web functionality and web browser functionality, then we probably should talk about, leveraging things like Apex or Visual Builder or ADF or something else. We are a hybrid of a native application. And when I say hybrid, we function like a natively installed application, but deploy like a web application, right? So we leverage 3-tier architecture, but we behave as if we're a natively installed application. And there's huge value in that. When you're in a web browser running an HTML page, you're generally restricted to the boundaries of the browser. You can't really interact with the user machine. And yes, I realize there are some things that you could interact with, but as a general statement, you're stuck within the borders of the browser. With forms, you could do just about anything on the client machine. You could interact with software that's there. For example, we have a lot of customers that integrate with the Microsoft Office tools. Maybe you want to generate a form letter with Microsoft Word or Excel. We have customers that create scheduled events in Microsoft Outlook. Maybe you have your own libraries that you want to run on the user tier to operate a piece of hardware right? Barcode readers or a scale, or we've even got a customer that interacts a form or integrates a forms application with a locking mechanism on a door that's connected to the machine where forms is running. It's the coolest thing in the world. So lots of cool stuff that you could do, but you have to get out of this mindset that somehow it functions like a web page. It doesn't. The second question on here was about the forms application deployment services. In the working with forms guide, there is some documentation on the forms application deployment services. However, admittedly, the documentation is fairly thin on it. For the time being, if that documentation is insufficient for you, I would recommend either reaching out to support or leveraging the forms forum, which if you already do that, you'll know that in many cases, I'm the one interacting on there most of the time. But I would recommend that for now. We are working on improving that documentation, but it is a little bit at a time. The other question, another question was my Twitter account. Actually, I have that in the end. We'll show you at the end. But it's at Oracle Forms PM, but I'll show it to you at the end. Actually, I think I could do it here. Can everybody see the questions and answers, or is it just the person that typed it? I don't know the answer to that question. I guess everybody could see it. Okay. So the next question in the question and answer is about the licensing for analytics server. I think I mentioned that. So licensing is for analytics publisher. I'm typing this, not server.
The
Another,
attendees can click on the answered tab on Q&A and see the answers there.
yeah, we got them there. So another question on here is about IPv6 or possibly dual stack. Funny you should say that. We're actually working on that. In theory, and I say in theory because the testing is still ongoing, we believe that dual stack should work already with 12.2.1.19. With earlier versions, that neither IPv6 or dual stack potentially will work because of some limitations in that embedded database client. But we are working on that, and we should have some updated documentation hopefully soon on that topic. Another question, I mentioned 12.2.1.19 features implemented quickly, et cetera, et cetera. If you take a look at that new features guide that I mentioned, in the new features guide, I offer, at least where possible, some samples or example code where necessary, or the information on how to enable such features. For example, I'm going to make something up. There's a new applet parameter, always on top, right? So if you're running Form Standalone Launcher or Web Start, you could set always on top equals true, and that sets that window to always be on top of all the other windows on the user's desktop. There's a applet parameter is resizable. You could set that to true or false. Maybe you don't want the user to be allowed to resize the form for whatever reason. You could set that to true or false. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. There's some environment variables. For example, the database login hints, we call them. That gives you the ability to customize the text that goes into the default forms login dialog. Maybe you want to have text that says username is case sensitive, be careful when entering your username. You could now add that text very simply by setting an environment variable and passing in the string that you want. So if you consider just those three I just mentioned, you didn't have to change a single line of code to implement those, but the application benefits from the change. So there's a whole bunch of those that you'll find listed in the new features guide. So again, I recommend that you take a look at that document. I would share the URL to the document, but I don't have it easily accessible with my slides going. I'm not sure I'm following this question. It says, does it look for protocol on the server or the user's compute device? Oh, I assume we're talking about the custom protocol handlers. That's all client side. If you're referring to the language detection, that also is on the user side. The user's language detected and is sent to the server. In the case of the custom protocol handlers, that's entirely a configuration that happens on the user tier. Another question on here, performance issue when running forms on cloud, on-prem DB, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, so I guess the question is, would there be a performance issue with running middleware in cloud versus an on-prem database? Here's the best way to answer that question. Whether you're running in cloud, whether you're running middleware in cloud and the database on-prem, or you're running the middleware software in Florida in the United States and running the database in Oregon, is essentially the same thing. Cloud is not any magical, mystical thing. It's effectively just a remote machine. So the any concepts are going to be the same. So if there's latency between Florida and Oregon, and that's where your two data centers are, then yeah, there's going to be performance issues. If there's latency between the cloud instance, depending upon what region you run in, and your on-prem environment, you're going to have latency issues. But I will tell you this, as a general statement, the performance that we're seeing in the cloud space is unbelievably like blazing fast. And I don't want to say that as if I'm trying to sell it to you. You need to go test it yourself. But so far, all of the testing we've done, either on purpose or just as a side effect of something else we're doing, the performance we're getting out of our cloud environments is amazing. I don't even know how else to describe it. So even if there is a latency issue, you're probably going to make it up from the fact that the middleware is performing so well. So it's, again, it's worth trying. It doesn't hurt to try it. You get, if you're not already using Oracle Cloud, you get to try it for 30 days for free anyway. Similar is true of the licensing. If you want to try it for free for 30 days, you could do that. If you need longer than that, contact your local sales rep, and they could arrange to potentially get you a longer trial period. So definitely something worth checking out. The next question is about recompiling. If I'm moving from 12.2.1.4 to 12.2.1.19, the answer is yes. Yes, because anytime we change the database client, you're going to need to regenerate. And in this case, we did. So yes, you need to regenerate your applications when you move between versions. I mentioned the protocol handler. Yes, it is only supported in 12.2.1.19. I see Frank responded to that. There's a question on here about having a reports only builder install. Again, another funny that you're asking that kind of question, because we are talking about that. I don't know if we're going to do it, but we are investigating the possibility of doing that, along with some lighter weight install options as well. And then the other or almost last question on here is about upgrading. To be very clear, if you're on a very old version like 6i and you want to get to 12.2.1.19, you could do that directly, because that was two-tier architecture in most cases. So there's no domain in question. So you could directly go from 6 to 12.2.1.19. However, if you're coming from a previous web environment that used WebLogic Server, you cannot upgrade and expect to keep your configuration. So if you're coming from 11 or an earlier 12 version, you have to move to 12.2.1.3 or 12.2.1.4 first. I guess I should have made that clear. And none of what I just said applies to anything Oracle e-business suite. Somebody asked about ERP. This is all strictly standalone forms. Okay, so that's all the questions I have. I'm going to move very quickly. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I know a few people that are on here that are gnawing at the bit to see what's going on with 14. We are doing a full 14 session on October 10th, so I encourage you guys to register and attend that. For right now, I'm just going to share a few sneak peeks with you. I'm doing another session Thursday, where I'm going to do a smaller version of what we're doing here, as well as a small version of 14, as well as some mobility questions. We're going to do that with Odie Tug and AuraPlayer. So that'll be on Thursday. And again, on October 10th, we'll be talking about a full hour of 14. And then in November, hopefully I'll be in Germany at the German user group with a 3-hour block of time where we're going to talk in depth about all of these topics. So there is a statement of direction. Back to the slides. There is a statement of directions for forms that provides some high-level guidance on what you should be doing, as well as what we are doing as we start to approach this next release. So I encourage you to take a look at that. If you want the broader outlook on Fusion middleware, I encourage you to take a look at the Fusion middleware statement of direction. It's going to talk more specifically about 14 and at a high level what we're planning on doing with it and when it's planned on being available. And that document does get updated from time to time as things change. So that's kind of what's going on there. So for 14, we're planning, like I said, an extensive array of new features. It would take us hours and hours and hours to go through it here. In fact, I'm not even sure how I'm gonna share that information with you once it does become available. There's so much of it. But the key target that we're after for 14 is runtime user interface, giving you the features and functionality in the runtime that allow you to make your applications look fresher. And of course, a whole array of other features as well, but runtime is the key. Standalone launcher improvements, some minor builder improvements. I mentioned the more lighter weight installation and configuration options. We're planning on picking up support on the server for Java 17 and Java 21. The database embedded client is planned to be 23. So yes, regeneration will be necessary. Here's a very quick sneak peek. Some of these I've already shared with you guys on social media, but I'm going to do it again here. You'll see we've added a whole bunch of new properties for buttons. It's not going to be just labels or images anymore. Now you could have curved corners and images with labels. And where do you want the image? The left, the right, the top, the bottom. Text field options, so placeholder text, so things that you commonly see in web pages. Persistent placeholder in the middle there. Where it says hello world on the bottom, where the label or the prompt stays within the boundaries of the field. We're going to pick up support for local fonts. Again, very different from a web page. So if you want to have your application display a particular user font, we'll be able to support that. It's picking up the fonts from the user's machine. So if the user's machine does not have that font, it will just display whatever the default font is. Some new display visualizations, as we're going to refer to them as. We're not calling them new widgets. They are the same widgets, just visualized differently. So at the very bottom, you can see check boxes shown potentially as a toggle button, a small switch or a big switch. But at the end of the day, it's still a Boolean object. Some changes to concealed data, like the login password field, and even your own custom concealed data fields. We're going to give you the ability to set the character that's used for that concealed data, as well as include optionally a button where you could show the contents, like a show password button. That will be available to see optionally. Again, I mentioned that we do have a few remaining events for the year. On September 28th, like I said, I'm going to do a consolidated or condensed version of what we just did here, as well as some more information about 14. Or a player is going to talk about some of the ways that you could mobilize some of the form's business logic. On October 10th, the New York user group has graciously invited me back to do a more broad discussion about 14, where I'll share some more screenshots and we'll talk about some of the technology changes that we're going to make. And then again in November, I will be doing a live event where the German user group was gracious enough to give me a 3-hour consecutive block of time where I could see if I could actually talk for 3 hours. That should be interesting. So that's kind of where we are. So the key takeaway from this is 12.2.1.4 ends error correction support in September 24. So it's time to upgrade. You don't really want to wait too long. And there's a lot of new features that I really encourage you to go take a look for or look at. Do we have any outstanding questions? Somebody asked, is FSAL part of Forms 12 or can it be used with earlier versions? No, it cannot. It is, Standalone Launcher is a feature of 12. It is tied to the version number. So actually, not only can you not move it back into version 10, as you're asking, the Standalone Launcher is a version to version match. So you cannot take 12.2.1.19 Standalone Launcher and plan on using it with a 12.2.1.4 server. It won't work. So it is version matched. In version 14, I will give you a little bit of a sneak peek. For 14, we are working on an automatic update, which right now Standalone Launcher does not have. We're looking at introducing an automatic update feature for Standalone Launcher. So if the server gets patched or something and the Standalone Launcher on the client needs to be updated, the user will get notified that an update is there, and we will actually automatically update it, assuming the user acknowledges and says, yeah, go ahead and update it for me. Frank mentioned that 14.12 was officially announced, Fusion Middleware 12.2. Yeah, so right now on paper in the statement of direction, it says that our plan is to deliver Fusion Middleware 14 sometime in 2024. We do not have any exact dates yet. In fact, we actually have some other interesting stuff coming in between there, which I can't really share with you right now, but there is some more really cool stuff coming, so I'm excited about that. Question about WebUtil and whether or not there's a new version coming for 14. Every new release of the product gets a new or an updated version of WebUtil, so that will get updated as well. There are some new features we are planning for it, although they're kind of minimal at the moment. We may introduce some more as we go. We are at the top of the hour. Does anybody have any remaining questions that I may not have answered? And there's my Twitter account at the bottom of the screen.
And I'll just add this, Michael, to the attendees. This the webinar, the video, and the slides will be posted on both NYOUG's website and Viscosity's as well.
And again, I want to thank the New York user group. This was a great session, and I really appreciate the invite. Hopefully, everyone got some useful information out of this. As everybody knows, for those that know me, never will I finish on time because there's so much information. I could just keep talking all day. So if you have other questions, reach out to me on the Oracle Forms forum or Twitter or email me or whatever it is. We will make sure that we get you answers to all of your questions, at least as best we can. So lots of work is going on. Don't think for a moment we're resting. There is no rest. Lots of work going on, and we're happy about it and we're excited about it. Hopefully, we'll be able to deliver here soon. Coleman, thank you again, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks at the next webinar. And again, this will be posted on both websites. Everybody have a safe and joyous day. Thank you.